The next presenter is Chip Schenck, who is VP of Sales Innovation at Shutterstock, and he's going to talk about AI and the future of content production. So, Chip, thank you.
You need to see it from every angle. Shutterstock's
Alrighty.
content library.
You guys are getting
has the
robbed of an
content and data
amazing.
you
Oh, there we
need
go.
to train computer vision models. Whether you need 1,000 different angles of red chairs or red high heels, maybe you're looking for 100,000 images of a red car. We've got you covered. With millions of assets and 1 million more added every week by contributors from around the world. Plus, every asset is tagged with up to 50 labels, all reviewed by both artificial intelligence and human intelligence to ensure complete accuracy, so you can build faster with precision. Power your computer vision models with Shutterstock. Get started today.
Alrighty, that is our introduction. So my name is Chip Schenck. I am the VP of Innovation at Shutterstock. Just wanted to say thank you for coming. I have an interesting background, which is that I come from the programmatic and the data world, more from the ad world. And I've worked for a long time kind of helping customers figure out how to audience target. But what's interesting is that I've spent so much time in data and programmatic that I've always wondered, why can't ads be more effective? Why can't ads be more relevant to the consumer? I mean, they have all of my data. Come on. So what I learned was that actually in programmatic, the greater the scale, right, the greater the problem, because now creatives had to create all of this content and all of these versions. So it actually was compounding the problem, not helping the problem. So that higher velocity became an issue, which led me to Shutterstock. And the question and the answer of how can I use data more effectively to enable effective content. And so for me, right, it's always been, and as I hear from most of the folks in the creative world, like, AI has always been anathema to creativity. But what we're discovering is it's just the opposite. So no one disputes that AI obviously is a big topic. We're here at a conference, right, specifically dedicated to it. But what's interesting is that every business struggles to integrate AI. And that comes from a lot of different challenges, but at the end of the day, that struggle and the thinking, because it's such a big topic to tackle, right, sometimes makes them delay. And whether it's they're held back by certain fears, right? Whether there's bias in models or, there's a little bit of a black box. How does it necessarily make decisions? Will AI give me the right answer? Think about it from someone at an ad agency. They're thinking, wait a minute, I build creatives all day long. How could AI possibly help me? And so the way that we look at it is you have to answer the question by starting and looking at the customer and looking at what's going to benefit them on an everyday basis. How can you solve a customer problem that is currently solved by humans but needs greater scale and greater speed to solve, right? And in nearly every case, as we start thinking about AI, it's going to help deliver better answers, right? Faster, better capabilities, and ultimately, at the end of the day, performance. So let's take a step back for a second. I'm from Shutterstock. What is Shutterstock doing on the stage at an AI conference, right? And so you probably think of us, for those who know us, as stock photography. But in reality, Shutterstock is an end-to-end creative platform encompassing content, technology, and data, right? And what that means for our potential and what we do in AI is we have a massive library of 400 million creative assets, right? And with that massive library, we have huge raw material, right? There's incredible data sets connected to all of those assets. And when you take all of that data and you actually are refreshing those assets to the tune of about 1 million new assets a week, you have a continuous stream of fresh new data. Then you actually look at, we're a digital native company. Search is in our blood. So we write algos every single day to improve the customer experience, and in particular, the customer search experience. You put all those things together, And you have the foundational elements for AI development to help drive creative decision making and to help those creators do their job better. So as a consumer, you guys have probably seen this, right? We are overwhelmed with content, right? We see content everywhere. It has been the new way for communication, simply because now that the internet has been fully ensconced in every part of our lives every single day, content is kind of the only communication medium, right? And so we're seeing this across multiple platforms. It's going to continue to accelerate, right? You've gone from a couple million websites to almost 2 billion. Like, this is crazy over just a short period of time, right? And in this growing world of content, it's this kind of loop where you have to create more content, but more importantly, you have to create more compelling content. Ipsos says that 90% of the ad click is specifically related to the creative, not to the targeting. We now see more ads in any point of history, and I guarantee that all of our attention spans are shorter. So Google's research says that you have 50 milliseconds to determine whether or not you like a creative. 50 milliseconds. So now we're being blown away by millions of messages, right? Thousands, right, every hour, right? And you have to then decide in that millisecond, and you're not even doing it, your brain's doing it for you, what I like and what I don't. This creates a problem for creators more than ever. If they have to make decisions on what content they need to decide on, and they're competing against thousands or millions of other pieces of content that have 50 milliseconds to determine whether or not they're going to be successful, right? They have to find and they have to succeed. How do they do that when there are hundreds of millions of choices out there every single day for them to figure out how to build creative? And so we've boiled it down to, in the creative world, there are 3 core needs, right, that these creators are looking for. If you think about creative now, right, everyone has Facebook or some sort of social media channel, and you're creating content every day. Everyone is a creator. And in this world of everyone is a creator, that kind of splits you into 2 different camps. You're a professional creator, where you're being asked to produce creative all the time with fewer resources on an accelerated schedule for multiple platforms. Or if you're a non-professional creator and you're thinking about creating ads, right, you have no guidance of understanding what's going to be effective, and therefore no confidence, right? And making content now is easy, but that doesn't always mean that the content is going to be effective, right? So creators need to create something that is local and relevant, right? They need help creating something that's local and relevant. They need more help through workflow to assist in their decision making, right? Because of this sheer volume of content. And then the third thing they need is, because of this need for speed, right, they have to be able to move directly from design into distribution with confidence and fast. So those 3 needs are what are driving creators as they think about how to be successful today. The good news is, we're at an AI conference. AI can help, right? If we continue on that creative theme, right, when we think of the creative challenges and the needs of the creative community, right, how can AI help reduce the noise and help discover the right content so that the creator can make something that's more effective? So here are some examples about how we think that the creative community can benefit from AI. But first, we've got to step back and we've got to look at the creative process. I'm sure there aren't a lot of folks here who actually sit and kind of create ads or create content every day, right? If you're a website designer or whatever you do. So this is the creative process, right? What you're seeing here is the creative process. It looks a little different whether you're sitting on the ad side or you're a website builder or you're writing articles or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, right, it's a journey that has multiple different steps and uses multiple different technologies that hardly ever talk to each other. And because as a human, creative is an emotionally driven, right, process based on your own filter, right, there needs to be some sort of objectivity in the process to actually inform the content performance. So that means that these creators have a big challenge, which is called, in the creative world, the cold start challenge, right? Where do they begin? They've been given a brief, right? What do you do? Well, some of them go to Google, some of them look at old research, some of them actually look at prior campaign performance, but at the end of the day, that doesn't help them. There's nothing that's actually inspiring them other than their brain trying to kind of think of how to work. So how can you help them get that process started, right? Because most of the time, if the person themselves who've been given the brief to create, if they're not coming up with something, then it's generally the most senior voice in the room that's guiding it. And that is no longer objective. So at a high level, the first big use case that we see, right, for AI is to help enable better creative decision making. And this, whether the creative is your asset or whether the creative is coming from somewhere else, right, the idea of actually enabling better creative decision making will enable better performance. So how can AI, if you're starting with your assets and your creative assets, how can AI help you learn more about your assets and what you can do with them, right? So you have a lot of assets. You don't really know other than your own human filter of what those assets can do, right? But when you put AI overlapping that and looking at the assets, they can help you do things like scoring the content according to potential performance. How will this content perform in certain situations? It can help you understand how an audience is actually going to react to content before you've ever shown them the content, right? Asset recommendations, which assets are going to be right for which situation, right? These are a lot of different things that the creative world beforehand has been scared of because they're scared it's going to take their job. But in fact, the volume and the requirement on the creative community is so great, right? All this is doing is helping give them a head start. So here's what it looks like when AI is applied to the creative process, right? So the creative process typically starts with a brief, right, as we saw on that path, right? And a person enters their goals into a brief, right? As they're entering the goals in the brief, the AI is picking up on trigger words, right? And it's picking up on certain components based on that, right? And as you enter more of your goals and your KPIs or the audiences you're targeting it or their geos or whatnot, right? The assets are rendering and actually coming up and suggesting, but they're dynamically updating as new information is put in, right? The other thing that's happening, right, with number 2 there, is that assets can actually, right, is that AI can help you score those assets on a predictive basis to understand how these assets might perform against those KPIs in the brief, right, which is on the right-hand side, right? So as those KPIs change, right, the assets change, as do the scores. So you could have the same asset with different goals, have a different score, because the AI is now going through, right, millions of creative elements in assets and going through millions of performance elements and then mapping them and making sure and understanding kind of every single situation, right? Humans couldn't do that with Excel in 1 billion years. It's just not possible, but it is needed. And then the third part of it, which is actually something that's not available, right, in any sense, is how do you actually have predictive insights, right? How can you actually understand when an asset fits your KPIs, why does it fit your KPIs? Why is this going to work, right? Which is the big missing question in most of creative development. You have a lot of A/B testing out there, which we'll talk about in a second, but it's never telling you why. It's only telling you what doesn't work. So if you don't have assets, if you don't have creative assets, the AI can help you understand how to find the right assets, right? And as a content business, even from our perspective, we have hundreds of millions of assets. We think every day about how to make it easier for people to find those assets, right? And the easier we make it to find those assets by leveraging AI, the more likely those assets are to perform, and obviously people will return, right, to continue buying assets. So here's an example of how it might help in this particular instance, right? User enters a natural language brief, right? We're not talking about tick boxes, we're just talking about writing in your goals, right? Again, the AI finds the triggers in the description. It starts recommending assets from our library, right? And those assets dynamically change as more trigger words are put in the description. And then at the end of the day, right, the AI is doing that same thing that we're talking about before, which is it's actually taking the millions of creative data elements, matching it from thousands of campaigns, the millions of performance elements, and looking at every possible combination based on every single point entered, right? And it's doing this obviously at enormous speeds, but it actually then allows a creator in real time to think about what do I need to create. So we talked about A/B testing for a second, right? A/B testing is fraught with challenges. It's something that we as in the ad community, in the creative world, have been doing for decades, right? You might even think about it for hundreds of years if you go beyond the ad world. But it's really about telling you in a point of time what didn't work. It doesn't tell you why something did or didn't work in that test. And by the time that test is over, things may have changed, right? So wouldn't you rather actually have something be able to continuously tell you and be available, right? And then to tell you why, in a way, not have to pay for it, because every time you have to run an A/B test, you got to pay some money to actually put it in market to get those results. And another way is that actually AI helps build creative briefs, right? So going back to that original part of the beginning of the process, right? Creative brief writing is a long process. But if AI can help enable some of that brief writing, right? And enable by actually pre-selecting in the same way that in Google or any other search engine, it starts auto-suggesting, right, ends of phrases. In the same way, if you can actually have and enable real-time briefs, you're saving, right, time for that creator so that they can spend more time creating and less time searching, or more time creating and less time actually putting together the brief. So the second area, the second big use case after the whole idea of predictive performance and discovering and enabling better creative decisions is computer vision, right? And when we obviously talk about computer vision, we are talking about data sets to help train models. We're talking about general models that then can be used to build off of, or specific models as either an endpoint or a deliverable itself that can actually help companies deliver any answer that they need using, right, using the learnings from a raw data set. So how do we use these baseline data sets so customers can then train their own models, use our models, or ultimately use our endpoints? And so when we look at it, right, we're looking at it from the perspective of what data sets do we have and what data sets are going to be useful. So, first example, when we think about all that stuff that we talked about before in the creative world, right, when we get into computer vision, we're talking about way beyond the creative world, right? It goes way behind those advertising and creative use cases, right? And so we'll go through a couple of examples, right? Here, when you think about Facebook, right? Facebook has billions of posts every day, right? And they have to monitor those posts. But at the end of the day, how are you actually monitoring those posts, right, that no human can look at when you actually have something that a fair amount of time or even one time a day could be inflammatory, offensive, whatever it is, right? And humans can't get through a fraction of that content. And it's just a continuous onslaught of new stuff. So how can you improve the safety of that content so that the experience for the consumer, right, is better? Well, you train models to understand what violence looks like, right, through images, right, or videos. You train them to look like what hate might look like, what guns might look like, whatever the subject matter that may or may not be, offensive to particular audiences. And this allows the human brain, right, to work with a smaller set, right, of things, and then be able to look at it and kind of, once that noise is reduced and it's like, okay, these are the things that the AI thinks, right, because the model's been trained that thinks that might actually be offensive, and it allows a human to then get through. So it's filtering down a lot of what's out there. Another example is object detection, right? This is probably something that everyone thinks about on a daily basis when we think about, right, our overall industry. Whether it's for autonomous driving, could be for UAVs, right? We're just training the software to understand and recognize places, landmarks, right, terrain. But again, the whole concept of actually using images that could have been used to actually build an ad campaign can also now train, right, autonomous driving is a completely new concept. My favorite, safety. So when you think about manufacturers, Siemens, for example, right, they have thousands of miles of pipes in their factories, right? There's no way for them to check the safety every single day, right? And so what happens if you could actually take all the cameras that actually take pictures at every junction point, right, across the pipes, whether it's resonance or whatnot, that actually then you actually feed all of those assets into a model that has been trained to look for cracks, so that all of those images every day can be processed, right, and discovering cracks and averting disaster before disaster would happen, right? A super beneficial use of how AI, right, and computer vision in particular, can help and do something that humans could never do. And then another lifesaver, health. What happens if you could actually train a model to understand what disease looks like? How much of a head start could you give medical professionals in taking and going through the scans that they look through and helping them kind of pre-identify, or at least give them better direction as to what to look for when they have so much to look through every single day? So again, there are lots of different use cases that are way beyond advertising and creative when you get into computer vision across essentially an infinite number of industries, right? Taken from the hundreds of millions of assets that we or that individual companies have, right, that they could be using on a daily basis. But it needs to have the metadata behind it, right? The asset, the description, all of the particular things that actually then a model can learn from. So when we think about the three things to take away, right, about how AI can better be incorporated into different businesses, right, the first one is that the challenge has to be a human one. It's something that we can do, but it needs greater scale, efficiency, speed, whatever it is, okay? So it's really good at solving human challenges, which seems a little bit of an opposite thought. The second is that learning takes time. Right? We're not just at the infancy, right, of computer vision and of predictive performance or whatnot, but training takes time, a lot of scalability issues in terms of repeatability and accuracy, and so you just have to keep on training, right? And it gets better and better and better and better. And then the third thing is that we have to think about the human element again, hence that kind of human sandwich. The human element around how do we think about, right, the positive and negative effects of human intervention, right, when we're thinking about AI, whether it's bias, because someone might have put in certain keywords, because non-intentionally, that's just how they might have written something down, right? So to learn, AI needs good influences, objective influences, and role models, no pun intended. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions, or should...
Yeah, we absolutely have time for questions. So if anybody have any questions, feel free to come up to the microphones either there or there and put a question across to Chip. Whilst waiting, question. You talked about a lot of the applications. There's some really interesting ones there. Again, healthcare, for example, is top of mind. As you look forward to next year, what's kind of top of your agenda? What are you excited to see next year?
I mean, it's a part of the benefit. It goes back to the beginning of what we were talking about, which is what's the customer use case? How can the customer benefit? And as we sit and we talk about some of these use cases, we stimulate a lot of things where someone may come to us from an industry that we had never really thought, oh my God, of course we can do that. And that's actually part of the great piece about kind of putting it out there and helping people understand a variety of use cases so that someone can come back, which happens all the time, and saying, could you do this, right? And that's a human solve using then the ultimate technology. So there's a lot of different things that we're looking at, but the real focus right now in the creative world is how do we use predictive? And then in the computer vision world, what are the industries that will benefit fastest? And then what are the industries that actually need more time to develop and leverage so that we can put better data against our assets?
Right. Makes sense. And we have a question from over there.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a good segue to what has been just mentioned now. Do you have like a public example that you can talk about where a company came in and said, can you use computer vision with your immense library and help us achieve something in the predictive space?
Sure.
And if you have something with academia as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, we should take it offline and we can talk to you about it afterwards, but we have lots of different public examples.
Love that.
Yeah, sure.
Do we have any other questions? Again, if you have anything you want to ask, please step up and talk about it. You mentioned the human challenge was something I was talking about this morning. So can you, is that helping the human challenge within the enterprises, or are you also seeing the kind of the challenges of retaining the right staff and talent for these things?
And are you saying, like, in terms of the way that people perceive AI and how AI is used, in terms of their particular job, or just the human challenge of how actually they figure out how to weave it into their job?
It's more the operational side. So yeah, the kind of attracting data sentists, for example. Is a big challenge in the industry. So
it is, and it's funny actually. Dr. Alessandra Sala, who's our chief data scientist, right, our head of AI. We were actually just talking to someone, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'll travel anywhere to see Alessandra," right? In the sense that there are certain people who've been doing certain things over a period of time, and I think from that end, it's the people that initially will attract. And so for us, we have a really interesting use case, both from the predictive standpoint, but also from the computer vision, and that we can live in both worlds. I think really it gets people interested because it's an interesting challenge to solve. Right. So I think that everyone, everyone in their respective fields always is looking for a challenge, and we definitely present one.
Definitely got them. Have another question?
Sure. I just wanted to know if you were doing anything with temporal segmentation or behavioral understanding and analytics around the...
Good question. That's a really good question. So I would have to actually take it offline with you and talk a little bit. I think that some of the kind of touch points in the areas would be a little bit around semantics and emotion and whatnot. So less temporal, but there are kind of outlines. But we can, if I can understand your question, we can talk offline a little bit better.
That makes sense. Perfect. Thanks.
Yep.
All right. I think
Thank
that's
you
what we
so
got.
much.
Thank you very much, Chip.